Hello and welcome to another podcast from Fantasy Football Scout. Today we are talking building your Game Week 1 squads, and I am joined by Az. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, tinkering away.
Yeah, lots of tinkering being done at the moment, lots of drafts being drawn up. Obviously, we don't have fixtures yet, so we can't talk about specifics with drafts necessarily, even though we will have some other videos about that this week. But yeah, at the time of recording this, no fixtures. So we're going to talk more generally about how we build our squad. So this would be good for new players especially, perhaps some kind of good stuff in there for kind of veterans of the game as well. Maybe there's things you haven't thought about before. So yeah, we're just going to do it in kind of like podcast format, just me and Az on the screen, just our faces. Hopefully that's not too bad for most of you. So yeah, let's kick off. Let's say whoever we're talking to, they've got into FPL already. We'll assume they've logged in, they can see their team. So let's say you're in that position and you want to start building your team for Game Week 1 as of right now. What's the first thing you start with? Do you go look through every single team? Do you put in the players that you absolutely feel you must have? Like, what's your kind of starting point?
Yeah, I think my advice to someone who's kind of never played before, is just starting, and I think probably the advice I give to all my casual friends is you don't need the best player in every position. Because I think the most common thing people do when they first start is they just pick like 15 players of good players, and then they wonder why they haven't been able to afford like Salah or De Bruyne or someone. They've got like quite a well balanced squad, but it's all too pricey, and they end up with like 8 million players on the bench. So just as the most basic bit of advice I can give is you don't need to do that. The kind of the cheaper players you get in, if they're playing and things, they can actually be some of your most valuable picks because it lets you bring in the biggest heavy hitter players into your team, which is where I start. So I don't know about you, but I start by picking 2 or 3 players who I think potentially are going to be ones that I look to captain every week, and who I think are going to be the top goal scorers at the end of the season, or the top point scorers at the end of the season. And I have to say, it's really tough this year because I think the price is around the heavy hitter mark, whereas last year, quite not many that we were reconsidering. Whereas this year, there's loads. It's really tough.
Yeah, no, I agree. You've got Aubameyang, Mane, Salah, all the same price, and Sterling, De Bruyne just under there, 11.5. So it's really difficult to fit in more than 2 or 3 this year. So I'm kind of the same. I tend to start with, I do have a quick look at all player prices. Obviously, there's a lot of players for each team, so it's a lot to go through at the start. So I tend to put in a couple of players that I really want, and then almost work backwards from there rather than putting in all the cheap players to start and just see what I can afford. Because there's always going to be those 1 or 2 players that you know you want. So right now in my team, I've got Salah and Sterling. When fixtures come out, that could be Aubameyang. Who knows?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Opposite of me.
Oh, who you got? Mane and De Bruyne, or Aubameyang and
I've
De
got
Bruyne?
Aubameyang. I've got Aubameyang and De Bruyne. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 100% set on that. Of course, there's still a long way to go. But I think Salah is just. Yes, he wasn't the top scorer last year, but you know how good he can be. And Sterling versus De Bruyne is probably going to be a debate that most people have all pre-season. But that's basically what I've done. So pick 2 really big hitters that I want, and then kind of start filling in the gaps in between there. Like, I don't know about you, I always go for as cheap a bench as possible. Do you ever? Because I see a lot of people, like you say, they kind of spread the money around, so they'll have like 15 players that are like good value, like £6-7 million, maybe £5 million players, including on the bench. Do you ever put good players on the bench?
No, and I don't even like doing it with goalkeepers. I know a lot of people rotate goalkeepers and they find 2 4.5s with decent fixtures and do that. I'm just really not big on that. I mean, the thing is, I mean, having one decent sub, or at least a kind of a decent playing sub, I think is really important, because you never know when a player could miss out. But realistically, I mean, in all the seasons I've ever played FPL, when have I ever needed to get down to my third sub? I'm happy to have a 4 million third sub defender who I'm probably not going to look to rely on at any point. I'll definitely have one sub that plays, and then the second sub is there. If you can find a 4 million, the perfect thing to get is a 4 million defender who plays. And this Ferguson guy, Nathan Ferguson, plays for Palace. He's the only one that I'm reading a little bit about that might end up sort of starting the season over Joel Ward. So he's kind of perfect for a bench, because you can pair him with Taylor of Burnley at 4.5, or one of the 4.5s, and then I think you've got your bench sorted.
Yeah, that's pretty much my tactic too, especially with goalkeepers. I used to be a rotator, so I used to get like a 4.5 and a 4.5 million and just rotate and try and play them for the best fixtures.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't happen often enough where you pick the right score. Obviously, you can get it a couple of weeks in a row, but it never feels like it's worth spending that extra 0.5 million where you can just put someone on the bench and just make them, as cheap as possible, which would be 4 million this year, and it usually is. Like goalkeeper wise, any love for going more than kind of 4.5 million?
Yeah, I mean, the goalkeepers this year particularly are really expensive. I was hoping that maybe someone like Lloris would come in at 5, but he hasn't. I mean, the only kind of keeper around the 5 million mark that I might be looking at would be Fabianski of West Ham, because we know he makes saves and gets bonus and that kind of thing. But I think if you're not going to pay the 5.5 for Pope, which I think is too much. And then you're looking at sort of Allison or Edison, but then you're locking yourself into one of those spots, rather than having, you might want Liverpool attackers, defenders, Man City defenders, attackers like that. It seems a bit of a, it seems to be the wrong move to lock yourself into a goalkeeper, I think, right at the start. So if you're not looking at any of those, then I think you have to go down to the 4.5 and just kind of stick with it. And I think Ryan at 4.5, I think he's going to be probably one of the most popular goalkeepers that we see going into the season. And I think he's a good shout. I think we've signed some, the we on the Brighton fan, just just to clarify. I think we had a sort of up and down season under Potter, but I think his ideas and things are starting to get through to the players. I think Ryan, is a shot stopper. He 135 points last season, 9 clean sheets. It's not bad for a 4.5 keeper, and I think we're going to be stronger next season. We signed a new centre back. Dunk might be leaving for 45 million to Chelsea, but I think we've got enough to cover him for that. So I like Ryan at 4.5. I think he's a good pick. Or you've got McCarthy as well at Southampton.
Yeah.
Both are decent enough, I think.
Yeah, and we should just say for any kind of new players that are maybe watching this, the reason that not everyone, that's not the right word probably, but a lot of FPL managers will go for the cheaper goalkeeper is just because of the way the goalkeeping points are done. So you get points for a clean sheet, of course, and we would expect more expensive goalkeepers to keep more clean sheets, but there's also save points, and those players like Edison and Allison at Liverpool, Man City, they don't have to make so many saves, so they don't have as many ways to kind of rack up those points. So you tend to find the 4.5 and £5 million keepers tend to be able to keep up, and in most cases they even beat them. We saw that last year with Pope being 4.5 million was the top scoring goalkeeper. That's why he's now gone up to 5.5 million. So let's say you've got your two big hitters in there. And you've got to obviously now fill out the rest of your squad. You've got your cheap bench, like you said. Is there any particular way that you will spread your budget around? Do you feel like you've got to have like a certain amount, not even necessarily a particular amount in defence, but do you like to have maybe one big hit in defender, one big hit in mid, one big hit in forward, and stuff like that, so you can move around?
Yeah, and I think I think that is something that's really important when you start getting a bit more kind of technical into it. I know Joe talks a lot about hitting these kind of price points, and I think I've got off to quite bad starts in the last couple of years, and a lot of that is because my team hasn't been able to be flexible enough to move around. So I know a lot of people are going 4 at the back, which is very viable this season. Then if you go 4 at the back and you have 5 in midfield, that means you're likely to have 2 4.5 strikers. And this is what happened to me. I ended up last season with Wickham and another 4.5 guy, and it just caused so many problems, because when someone like Ings or a striker starts hitting some form, you've suddenly got to kind of rework your entire team just to be able to get that striker in. And I feel like particularly around the forwards, if you can bring in a forward who's in form, they're the ones who really carry on the hot streaks going on. So I want to be able to move quite quickly to be able to do that. So that kind of eliminates 4-5-1 from my thinking, at least. When you've got someone like you've got Werner who's there, you've got Martial at 9. If you've got one of those, getting up to the 10 million, Aguero, Kane, that kind of thing, is a lot easier. Whereas, again, I'm seeing quite a few people who are going sort of ultra cheap at forwards, so like Mitrovic and Antonio and that kind of thing. I want to have at least one sort of more premium priced forward, just to make it a little bit easier to get the extra million to go up to someone else. So I think hitting those price points is really key. You need to have a bit of a balance to it, so that you can make the switches easier.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. So, like, example, the most expensive forward this year is 10.5 million, which is a lot cheaper than it has been in previous years. So, if you have Kane or Aguero, whoever it might be to start the season, if another forward does well, you can just switch them in one transfer. For me, I like to, in most cases, be able to get anyone in that I want in 2 moves. So if I save a free transfer, obviously I have 2 free transfers. So, you know, if I've got Salah and Sterling, like I've said, I might only have a cheap forward. But if I want to move to like a Kane or an Aguero or a Werner or a Martial, whoever it might be, I can take that money out of midfield and put it up front. Obviously, you're never going to be in a position where you can get absolutely everyone in your team anyway. But that I'm the same as you. That's why I don't like these 4-5-1, 5-4-1 formations, because it's not to say they won't do well. Because we know defenders, especially, are usually a little bit easier to call, I think, at the start of the season. Albeit it didn't really happen with Liverpool last year. But most of the time, the big hitting defenders, you know, are probably going to steadily get points across the season, whereas you don't necessarily know which attackers are in form. Or which teams are in form even. But the problem is, if you have like 5 defenders all priced at like 6 to 7, then you have a lot of money spread around a lot of players. So if you then want to get a big hit in midfielder and your highest priced midfielder is only 7 million, where are you getting that 6 or 5 or 6 million from? You've got to start making multiple transfers from the defence. So that's personally why I guess you and I don't like that way of doing things. So I'm pretty much the same with the budget. Yeah, as long as I can get players in 2, basically.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just the premium picks. It also what happens sort of further down the price as well. So I mean, a lot of people are looking at Souček, who looks like a really good value pick at 5 million. But if you're having him as a 4th midfielder, if he doesn't start doing very well after 2 or 3 weeks, and you want to get rid of him, and you know there's some options around the 6.5 mark which look quite good. So like Trossard at Brighton, I think he could have a big season this year. Foden as well, 6.5. If you've got Souček in, it becomes quite hard to get up to that 6.5 mark. And these aren't the plays that you want to be making lots of transfers to kind of upgrade. You want to be able to kind of move those around a bit easier, just so you can say, okay, Souček's doing rubbish, let's trade him out for someone else. Whereas if you're having to make other transfers just to upgrade a cheap midfielder, suddenly you're having to use a lot of transfers and things when you might not really want to. So just something else to consider. I mean, that's why the kind of the cheap prices are, you know, they look quite appealing, like someone like St. Maxim as well at 5.5, but actually you need them to perform, otherwise you're stuck with them for a while probably.
Yeah, it's basically why I like a lot of people, and this will change, but a lot of people are kind of looking towards midfield, but I actually quite like the 6 to 6.5 million forward picks. So let's say I go for whoever it might be at 6.5 million, Antonio. That then lets me go to Chris Wood, to Che Adams, to Mitrovic, whoever might become in form or get better fixtures. Having that kind of price point, like I said, that Joe mentions quite a lot on Scoutcast and stuff, that lets you then move to those kind of players, which is good. So yeah, that's kind of what I would do. So yeah, in terms of kind of thinking ahead, I suppose, or picking the players initially, how much of kind of last season's form do you take into account, and especially this season, because last season is not that long ago, like it's what, like a month or so, if that, at this point, and players aren't going to have had a huge amount of break. So are you just going to take into last season's form, or do you feel like it's kind of a cut off and you start fresh and you just look at fixtures and stuff? How do you go about picking particular players from there?
Yeah, I mean, the fixtures are obviously vital. You know, there's kind of some players where you can kind of think, well, the fixtures don't really matter. So, you know, if you're adamant that Salah's going to start well, it doesn't kind of. The thing is, the league is such a funny league because the fixtures are obviously important, but there's, apart from Liverpool and City, you kind of fancy someone like Salah to score against anyone. So even if they've got like what seems like quite a rough 5 games, it might actually still be quite lucrative for them. So I think form is something that, like you said, this year is really important. I mean, I'm looking at my team now, and actually a lot of the players in my draft I've got at the moment are players that I had at the end of last season. So it doesn't feel like it's a kind of a new start and a refresh. It almost does feel like a continuation of kind of what happened last year. The difference is that obviously we've got some player sort of reclassifications now. So, you know, Aubameyang midfield, I just think that's such a exciting thing to happen to him, especially if Lacazette leaves to go to, you know, Italy or somewhere. I mean, if you've got Aubameyang suddenly is an out of position a midfielder who gets a few games up front, I mean, that'd be crazy. Martial as well as a forward, I think that's actually quite nice because there's so many midfielders, and having a Man U striker up front to pick from means that's at least he's not in the mix with all the other midfielders as well. And then you've got the new signings. So Werner, I really like the look of. I think 9.5 is a really, really good price for him. I think if he can sort of carry on the form that he had sort of last season, then he's going to be one of the stand-up picks. And the trouble is, if you don't start, it's that kind of risk, isn't it? I think this is the other thing that comes with building your squad. You need to kind of decide who's the risks and who are pretty safe. So I think having two kind of risky players in your squad isn't too bad. So I've got Ziyech and Werner at the moment, mainly because I really like the look of them. I just think they both look great, and I think Chelsea are really attacking. I can't believe they haven't signed any defenders. They seem to have carried on with their sort of all-out attack approach. But if you start adding in too many kind of unknown entities into your squad, so if I add in Trossard into that, who I think might do well but might not. If you add Souček into that, okay, he had a couple of good games, but still we don't really know how he's going to do. If you've suddenly got a whole squad filled with unknowns, it's harder to kind of get away from them. So I would try and stick to kind of two of the risky players, and the rest of them I think you build from last season, and you say, okay, if they finished the season strongly last year or had good seasons last year, then they should be good picks going into the next season.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. Outside of kind of, maybe if an unknown happens to have the world's greatest fixtures ever, then that might change my mind a little bit, and I might take a punt. But I would be the same as you. I wouldn't want to fill my team with unknowns, and by unknowns, not players we've never heard of, but obviously teams that don't necessarily usually perform that well or usually score a huge amount of goals. Like Aston Villa, for example, Grealish created so many chances last year, but there was just no one to finish them off. So he still did really well from a points perspective, but I feel like he could do better. So maybe if they signed like I don't want to say world-class striker, but a top striker, then maybe that would change things. But like I'm looking at my draft right now, and there's no real players in there that haven't done well before, at least at times. Obviously, you can't necessarily predict everyone doing well all of the time, but the likes of Wood at Burnley is usually a pretty steady 10 to 12 goal plus striker. Antonio, we saw, ended the season really well. I don't. Some people have hard and fast rules about not getting players that are new to the league. So like Werner, for example, I don't really buy that. For me, he's a top forward that's already performed well in a really good league, Bundesliga, coming to a top team that I can only see scoring more goals than they did last year. They already scored a fair few last year. So for me, that's not really, I wouldn't call that a risk. Yes, he's an unknown because he's not played in the Premier League before, but he's a top-class player. And we saw Salah come in and absolutely smash it. So there's no reason Werner can't do something similar. Where I tend to kind of try and not pick too many players from is promoted sides, especially now, because back in the day when we first started playing, promoted players would always get a really, really nice price tag, which is relatively low. These days it doesn't seem to happen as much. I know the attacking fullbacks for Leeds, a lot of people are talking about Dallas and Eiling are 4.5 million. They could be options. But what's your general thinking with newly promoted sides? Do you try and steer clear, or do you like a bit of a risk?
Well, I think it depends on the teams. I mean, Sheffield United last season looked to be the kind of good team that would keep. I mean, I wasn't expecting them to have a good season as they had, but I thought they're a team that's done well in the Championship by keeping it quite tight, and they look like a kind of nice 1-0 sort of maximum 2-0 team, and that's about it. So it kind of attracted me towards Henderson, and I ended up going for O'Connell because I was worried about Lundstrom's minutes because he wasn't a starter in the Championship. And while I got it right about Sheffield United, I got it completely wrong about Lundstrom, so it kind of ruined my start to the season. So there's potential there because they come in at attractive prices. I mean, like Leeds, I think are a good example this year. If you think Biesler is this sort of god of tactical management, and Leeds are kind of now back to where they belong, and they're kind of they've been too good for the Championship for a while, then there is someone like Dallas. I think it could be a really strong pick. I've kind of made I don't know why I haven't made a name for myself, but I've always tried in the last few years to target a promoted striker, which kind of historically for me has worked really well. So we've had Mitrovic before. Last season we had Pukki, who I bought in after the first week. We had Andre Gray a few years ago, who did really well for me. And it's because a lot of the time a Championship team will come up and they'll be incredibly reliant on that striker to carry on scoring goals. So Leeds have got Bamford this season. So, when a team does sort of build itself around a striker, and that striker is tasked with, you are going to get our goals this year, then, they can kind of far exceed their price tag. So that's why I think a lot of people are going for Mitrovic. I mean, he's 6 million. He's one of the cheapest sort of nailed on starting forwards. He's had Premier League experience before and done pretty well in that. And, if Fulham have got any chance of staying up, they're going to be looking to him to get the goals. So I really like Mitrovic as a pick.
Yeah, I think the important thing probably is to not have hard and fast rules. Just because one player comes in and doesn't do well doesn't mean another one will. And same with promoted players. I won't necessarily avoid them, but I certainly won't fill my team with promoted players, especially defence. The defence is what worries me the most, because you just don't know. Like Sheffield United were a bit of an anomaly last year, like how well they did. I'm not saying that no one predicted them to do okay defensively, but I don't think anyone predicted to do quite what they did. But we see in other teams, like there was an article, I think it was actually on Fantasy Football Scout, and QPR had a really good record, and then they came up and shipped goals all over the place. So it's hard to tell what a team like Leeds will do, and it's all well and good talking about attacking returns, but the bread and butter of a defender is still, apart from maybe Trent and players like that, the bread and butter is still the clean sheet. So that's what will worry me a bit. But yeah, Mitrovic is someone I would definitely look at if the fixtures were right. I think he's done it before in the Premier League, so no concerns there. So last kind of thing, how obviously when the fixtures are out, that's going to be important. How many weeks ahead for your game week 1 side do you plan? Bearing in mind you've got things like wild cards and stuff people like to use early. Do you build your team for kind of the first 3 or 4 weeks, or do you think a bit longer than that?
No, I mean, I'm probably the worst person to have on this because the last 2 seasons my starts have been absolutely terrible. The season where I did quite well, I got off to a great start, but that was because I had a slightly different strategy, and I kind of stuck with it. So I had the wing backs and that kind of thing. Whereas look at my team now, it looks a bit more kind of balanced. So inevitably get off to a disaster again. But yeah, I mean, you need to look ahead. I see a lot of people planning to use a wild card quite early, and I can't really see the kind of logic of that. I'd much prefer to build a team that I think is going to do well than not need the wild card, and then I can use it if I get loads of injuries or if there's a sudden change in fixtures, and because you never really know when you're gonna need it. So no, I don't particularly like that strategy. I want to set my team up to do well, sort of over at least 4 or 5 weeks. That's how long I'll be looking at the fixtures. You can kind of identify where fixtures change. You can say, okay, so after 3 weeks, suddenly Aubameyang's going to go on a run of 5 green games. I'll be looking to make the shift from Salah to him then, and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, you want to make sure your team's set up pretty well for a few weeks. It's why having a kind of 4.5 bench option as well in defence can be quite useful, because say you've got another 4.5 defender who's got 2 good games and then 1 rough game and then a good game and then a rough game. That's when I think the rotation can be quite nice with another defender, when they can kind of fill in the gaps of when you've got a bit of a rough game. So that's when the spreadsheets come out, and that's when you see those things on the side, people saying the perfect rotation between different teams, and that kind of thing I think is really useful, and that can really take you up from just picking 4 defenders that you think are going to do quite well to suddenly actually having a plan of how to manage those. And I think it's kind of less important with the midfielders and strikers to worry about that kind of rotation, because all your midfielders and strikers you should be kind of banking on being able to get through one game and maybe nicking a goal or something like that. Obviously, if Mitrovic starts with 3 red fixtures in a row, that's going to put everyone off him. But if he's got 1 red in between 4 decent fixtures, then I don't think that's enough to put me off him.
Yeah, I completely agree about that defender. I don't tend to use too many spreadsheets, but I do for defence. So if I've got 3 players that I want to play all the time, I'll put their fixtures in for the next kind of 5 game weeks and see if there's any red marks where I really don't want to play them, like if they're playing, I don't know, Man City away, Liverpool away. And then my 4.5 million on the bench defender will be someone that fits in that slot quite nicely. You can overthink sometimes. Like last year, I bought into Tomori for that reason instead of Lundstrom, and that went really badly. But that was a
same.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little bit different because Lundstrom was 4 million was so cheap. Attacking returns. There's not really, from what we can see now, anyone like that this year. So I don't think you'll get punished quite as badly as we did last year. But yeah, I do like to do that. Yeah, it was really, really rough. Hopefully, well, he's not going to punish us this year, is he? Not for his position.
You'd hope not.
No, I really hope not. But in terms of planning ahead, I completely agree. Things change so quickly in FPL. I pretty much plan for the first 4 games. You could use a strategy where you force yourself to use a wild card. If the fixtures were so good for 4 weeks for certain players, like, I don't know, Chelsea, Spurs and Arsenal, and then suddenly after game week 4, the fixtures were amazing for Man City, Liverpool, Man United, you could use a wild card to completely overhaul your team. But I tend to go for the 3 to 4 game weeks. That's enough time to find out how teams are playing. First of all, promoted sides, I'm sure they're going to have a philosophy they've come up with from the Championship, and they're going to try and play the same, but it doesn't always work out like that. So you can see how teams are playing, who lines up. There's always like lineup, conundrums. There might be certain players we didn't expect to start that are, or vice versa. And then after 3 or 4 weeks, you've kind of got that info and you can start planning. And then if you need to wildcard, absolutely no problem at all. I've done that plenty of times in the first 4 to 6 weeks. But if you don't, you just hold it for a bit longer. And we've only got till game week 16 to use it anyway this year. So it is a little bit different. So yeah, anything else you want to add? Go on.
No, it's all right. Just one final thing. I think, I've always kind of tried to adopt this strategy before, but inevitably kind of you go off it a bit. But my real tactic this season is to really try and limit the amount of defensive transfers I make. And so the kind of the defenders I'm targeting this season, and my kind of general strategy, which obviously changes, is look for I don't mind paying the premium for the attacking defenders. So, Robertson, Alexander-Arnold, Doherty, Alonso, if he starts, all those kind of things. Paying 5.5, 6 million for those is fine. If we get some gems around 4.5 and 5, that's great. But I don't want to spend more than 5 million on a kind of a centre back option, because if you're paying more money for a less attacking player and they've got a rough fixture, you're going to be looking at switching your team around and moving your defense around a bit too much. And I want my attacking defenders to have a shout of getting attacking returns even in a fairly difficult game. So I haven't seen many people mentioning Aurier at 5.5, but I think he actually combines quite a lot of good parts of a defender. He's playing for a Mourinho team. I know they barely kept any clean sheets last season, but you've got to think he's going to tighten them up a little bit. But then he plays almost like a winger. So at 5.5, I quite like the idea of getting him. A lot of people are. If you're paying sort of 5 million for someone like Dunk or Soyuncu or someone like that, and Soyuncu's coming up against Man City or Man United or a decent attacking team, he's probably not going to get anything from it. Whereas if you pay a little bit extra and you get an attacking player and they've got the same game, then you've got a chance of getting something out of it. So I think when you're thinking about your defense, just think about the kind of the long-term prospects of them. And if they really don't offer any attacking threat, then I think maybe it's worth thinking about paying a bit more and getting someone a bit more attacking.
Yeah, I think for sure, I agree. You wouldn't want to spend a huge amount of transfer on defenders, and yeah, when you start paying 5.5 million plus, you preferably want some attacking returns. Like Wolves, for example, I think you made the point on Twitter. There's no way I would pay 5.5 for Bolly when I can get another centre back for 5 or Vinagre for 4.5 right now. It just seems crazy to spend that much on someone that's not attacking. Like even I don't know, like Man United defenders now, Maguire and Wan-Bissaka are still 5.5. Like look, Maguire has scored goals before, but he didn't do very many last year. Wan-Bissaka is attacking at times, but I wouldn't class him as an attacking fullback. So you'd really want specifically really good fixtures for them. Whereas maybe for other players, especially like Trent Doherty is another one I think you probably mentioned there as well. Like he's a player you can expect returns from in any kind of game for like 6 million. So that's where you pay the extra and you maybe hold on to him a bit longer than make your attacking transfers instead. So yeah, that's a nice.
Exactly. And I mean, even someone like kind of Laporte. I mean, he's 6 million, and okay, City are one of the best teams in the league, but it's a lot of money to pay for him. It takes up Man City's spot. It's he got 3 goals, 3 assists. He got 100. He did well a few seasons ago, but he seems very expensive. And when he has a kind of a tougher game, and City haven't exactly been the best kind of defensively anyway. I'd rather probably go for someone like Walker over him, who at least is sort of bombing up and down the wings every game. So yeah, I think that the centre backs I don't want to pay over 4.5 for a centre back this season. Is my strategy.
Well, okay, that's
Probably,
interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I fully agree with that. We're gonna with this. I mean, this could go on for ages when we get into specifics. I don't know if I fully agree with that because I feel like Liverpool and Man City will actually do better defensively this year. I think they both underperformed. Like I think Trent only got 14 clean sheets last year, whereas Robertson the season before got 21. Like that's a big difference. And obviously Allison missed a lot of the season as well. Oh, not a lot of the season, but he missed a good few games, and they didn't perform well defensively in those games. So I think someone like Van Dijk, 6.5 million centre back. I think maybe he's a bit different because he's playing for Liverpool. But I feel like you could pay for him because one of the things with centre backs is
true
they're pretty much nailed, and you got to remember as well this year there's going to be a lot of games in quick succession for a lot of the season. So we could maybe see fullbacks rotating a little bit more potentially.
That is true, but I mean, if you're looking at sort of two sort of premium defenders, I think Alexander-Arnold and Doherty are just streaks ahead of everyone else. So unless you're looking at having three sort of premium defenders, that's when I think Van Dijk or Laporte could maybe feature into that. But in terms of just having two, you could have Alexander-Arnold and Robertson, for example, who I think Robertson is still a better shout than Van Dijk, personally. I don't know. I think you can find with centre backs, you can tend to find sort of quite good options. I mean, Soyuncu last season, at 4.5 was a great shout, and I think we got unlucky with Tomori. We weren't expecting Chelsea to be that bad defensively, and he was around the 4.5 mark, as well. So I don't mind paying sort of less for that kind of centre back option. I think you can find some decent value, but I do think you get what you pay for when you go for the more expensive fullbacks. There's always exceptions. I'll probably end up with someone like Laporte. I'm not saying he's a bad option, especially in double game week. When the City and Liverpool defence go absolutely crazy. But as a general rule, I'm going to try and avoid the centre backs. We'll see how it goes.
It's interesting strategy. Like, I wouldn't necessarily rule out a centre back, but again, if I'm paying 6, unless the fixtures that massively sway, I'm always paying 6 for Doherty over 6 for Laporte. But as we say all the time, like Edison comes up. I would never pay 6 million for Edison, but he's almost like a guaranteed almost 6-pointer every single week. So he kind of ticks over, and I think sometimes we probably forget about those players. But it is much more exciting, I think, to have Doherty running up that wing.
You talk about Edison though. I mean, Edison got 133 points last season. Ryan got 135.
Yeah. That's why I said earlier I would never pay that much. But I think Laporte's slightly different. I think he's probably more likely to get maybe bonus points, attacking returns, and I would expect him to start most games. It's going to be interesting though for them specifically how they kind of line up with Aki. Does he come in? He's only 5.5. If he could nail down a spot, then suddenly maybe that's a centre back that I do want to pay for.
He's a perfect example, though. I don't. Even if Aki starts, I don't want him.
Why not?
At 5.5, I just it's too much. It's too much
for a Man City centre back. They're probably going to keep the first or second most amount of clean sheets this year, and we know he's attacking.
But look what happened with Stones. Look what happened with Stones at 5 million. We had Stones 2 years ago at 5 million. Came in, everyone had him. He was rubbish. We had Zinchenko last season. He was 5.5. We knew he had no attacking threat, but we thought, oh, it doesn't matter. He's a 5.5 Man City starter. He was rubbish again. And Laporte was fit then.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, this video has taken a slight different turn to what we... No, it's fine. It's fine. But this is a good lesson. Don't go for Man City defenders. They're too annoying to... Cool. I mean, the other thing is, even if Aki started the first couple, you wouldn't even know 100% he's going to keep starting with Pep. I feel like Laporte's priced at 6 because most of the time when he's fully fit, which he actually wasn't for a lot of last season, he's going to start. But yeah, Aki at 5.5 is a dream, but no guarantees. Cool. Anything else you want to add before we wrap this one up?
I don't think so. I mean, the only thing I haven't mentioned is Ziyech, who I can't pronounce his name. Ziyech. Okay, wow. I'm glad I asked. He's kind of an example of what I think is probably quite a just a pick based on absolutely nothing, because I don't know. I really want him. I've seen him play for Ajax, and I just think he looks absolutely fantastic. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was the player who kind of assisted the assister. He'll make Chelsea a better team, but I don't know if he's going to be the one that's really going to benefit FPL wise. So when I talk about kind of risky players around that, Werner's going to come in. He's going to be like the main goal scorer for Chelsea. That is literally what his role is going to be in that team. You don't know what Ziyech is going to be. So he's one who I'd have a bit of more caution on, but I just fancy the punt on him because I really like him. But don't have too many of those is my advice.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Like, I think people, and we especially, as we're doing like videos and stuff all the time and chatting on Twitter, kind of forget sometimes it's about fun. If you have a pick for your game at one side that you just want because why the hell not, then they should absolutely be in your team. Don't be put off by what people on Twitter and in other communities and stuff tell you to do. If you want that player, go for it. I do think the Chelsea boys are really interesting because I kind of agree. There's a really good article by Zofar on Fantasy Football Scatter about Ziyech, which I actually read last night.
I need to learn that.
Yeah, it's a hard one to get used to, but once you've got it, you'll be much better than everyone else. But yeah, he basically made the same point that he likes to shoot a lot, but the problem is a lot of them are outside the box, which of course is not going to go in as often as inside the box. And he does create quite a few chances, but my takeaway was he's basically going to make Pulisic and Werner better options.
Yeah.
But he's also 8 million, so if he does hit the ground running, then he's a much better price than the other two. So sometimes it's worth taking those risks if it's a player you like. So yeah, I think you said you're going to go for him. You have to now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, this is why I think my other bit of advice for people is build a team now, take a screenshot of it and see how that changes when it comes to the, an hour before the deadline. Because I think the thing that's really cost me at the start of the season before, in the last 2 seasons, has been making loads of last minute changes. So like I took De Bruyne, I had De Bruyne in all of my drafts last season. And then right at the end, I took him out to put a bit more money around my squad. And it was just an absolute disaster. So before I make any transfers on the final day, I want to go back to that squad I made, round about this time when I was fresh and didn't have all the Twitter noise and all that kind of stuff. See what's changed and just sort of try and work out why things have changed. And if there's no decent reason, maybe think about going back to how it was before.
Yeah, I really like that because so often, like I'll say something to someone or I'll say something on a video, and I'll have a reason for saying it, and then for whatever reason I go against it, and it's almost like you don't listen to your own opinion or your own advice. Like right now, I've got Sterling in. And I won't go into the reasons why I've got him over De Bruyne right now, but I've got him in. I kind of prefer him to Kevin De Bruyne. So by game week 1, when the deadline comes around, if I've got De Bruyne in instead, I guess I should be asking myself, what was the reason? Was there a real good reason? Or are you afraid because De Bruyne is 60% owned and Sterling's only 10% owned? So yeah, it'd be worth doing that. Take a screenshot and then ask yourself why you've made those changes, I guess. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining me, Az.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
We'll have plenty more videos to come this week, next week, and all the way through to pre-season, obviously through the season as well. So if you do enjoy it, make sure to give the video a like, hit subscribe if you're new around here as well. More draft videos to come, especially when the fixtures are out as well. We'll have more of that and just general tips and advice and stuff like that. So like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheers all.